Also, symbolism. What does the Temple of Solomon symbolize? It symbolizes gold. What does gold represent? It is the perfect metallic conductor of electricity. What does electricity represent? The awakening of the beast. Okay? So all this symbolism starts to fold upon itself there. And each and every seal of the prophets, each and every major prophet, each and every Christ, represents another wing being built on. Understanding that, we go back to the original architect, the original African man god who had a direct relationship with Solomon. That person's name was Hiram-Abiff, okay? First African god there. And as such, he was called upon by Solomon to come and build a temple. Now, as I'm explaining this, you're going to understand it more so from a metaphoric perspective, so don't try to think of it literally. It won't work that way. Hiram-Abiff, he was a master architect, and that's also what all the Christs are referred to. They are referred to as master architects, building onto the wing of Solomon. He was called by Solomon as the master architect to start building the temple. On his way there, once again, the Greys step in, represented mythologically as Jubello, Jubella, and Jubellum. 3, which is how the Greys always operate anyway. Okay, they always operate in 3s. They, as assassins, and very jealous ones, they go to Hiram-Abiff and say, hey, we hear you got a special invitation to the Temple of Solomon. We want to get in there too. Because, of course, once again, here's the philosophy. Flesh and bone versus wood and stone. Jubello, Jubella, and Jubellum, the Greys, were thinking of the Temple of Solomon as an actual chunk of real estate to own, operate, and control. An actual physical source of power, so to speak. And Hiram-Abiff is like, it's not that way. You're thinking of it the wrong way. And it's by invitation only, meaning you have to be in the family of man. You have to be one of the people of color and hue. You have to be one of the sun-kissed people of Earth to get in. If you look like one of the dead walking zombies, the pale-skinned Greys, you're not allowed. It's not for you. You'll destroy yourself because of the different type of frequency. So they don't understand that. They don't want to hear it. They still keep thinking in concrete terms of wood and stone. So symbolically, what do? They steal Hiram-Abiff's tools, most notably his setting maul. And they take it and they club him over the head with it and they kill him. They assassinate him. Okay, now think about this symbolically. Stealing the master architect's tools to build the temple and killing him with those tools. Herein lies the beginning of the infamous concept of raping and pillaging other people's history and making it look like it's your own. It started with the death of Hiram-Abiff. And to add insult to injury, nowadays you find out that these dim-witted initiates who are being initiated into the Masonic lodges, these white Freemasonry, are being told and being shown false images that Hiram-Abiff was actually white. Okay, now where else do we see that happening? We see that happening with Tutankhamun. Leaves Egypt, looking very African, goes to the British Museum for a little while, comes back from England looking very Caucasian. Now how the hell does that happen? Okay, here was the same thing that was happening with Hiram-Abiff. White Masonic lodges have raped, stolen, and pillaged that history and make the first African god man look like a white man to satisfy their own displacement from history, which we'll get into what happened there. Well, the Greys, knowing full well that the Temple of Solomon that was now on the rise as the new underground revolution, the new spiritual movement, the new Moorish legacy, the new Egyptian university system, they didn't like that very much. They weren't happy with that at all. So, what do? They begin their own espionage and sabotage maneuvers. Okay? They go into that environment and they start spreading rumors and whispering and telling them, hey, look, we can teach you how to be all-powerful, okay? Why do you want to be like the rest of them when you can be better than them, all right? And this is what starts the beginning of what I refer to as the white Masonic ego, okay? Which stands in retaliation to the gene for passion. The ego versus the gene for passion, or the passion of the Christ. This is what they start instituting psychologically via psychological warfare. Remember we said psychological warfare, guerrilla warfare, all right? They use it as a form of psychological warfare against those that would listen. And as such, they break away, some of them, from the original African group and start teaching them all sorts of lies, filling their heads with egomaniacal bullshit. And tell them, you know, if you want to be all-powerful, you have to do what we tell you, and we'll give you everything you want. Well, this particular group that splintered away became so warlike that they reneged on their responsibilities to Mother Earth and their roots, and was causing all sorts of mayhem and trouble for the rest of the Moorish legacy in the Egyptian university system, to the point where they didn't know what to do with them. Okay, it was becoming a real problem. Not only that, but they began to actually worship the Greys as their gods and decided we need to look like them. Mind you, the running theme has been pale-skinned reptilian, pale-skinned Canis feudal lord, pale-skinned gray. So what do these individuals do? They begin to experiment on themselves in all sorts of abominable ways, to the point where they bleed the color right out of their skin. And herein lies the beginning of the abomination known as the pale skin. And this is how the white man comes into existence. As such, now they had become such a problem that the Moorish legacy decides, okay, we keep them here, they're going to destroy the environment. And we're not going to kill them, they're our brothers and sisters, but what do we do with them? They can't stay here. It is decided to isolate them, take them and dump them in the only wasteland and transcontinental prison that nobody wanted in the first place. So what do? They take them and they march the pale skin across out of Africa in this mass exodus across the deserts of Arabia. Think about that, pale skin being marched through the deserts of Arabia. Imagine how pissed off they were. And then took them and dumped them into what we now refer to as Europe, and stuck them there. Now, they left a calling card because the name Europe comes from the African god queen known as Europa. And as such, they named Europe after the African god queen as a way of saying, look, yes, you've been casted out, but you're still part of the family of man. If you correct the error of your ways, you can come back in anytime you want. Well, unfortunately, the Greys, being conniving little SOBs that they are, this is what they wanted all along. This is what they planned on. They wanted the pale skin abomination to be isolated all by itself in Europe. Why? Because at that point, once they were isolated, they could work on that ego of hatred and bitterness, okay? They had just been casted out. They had just been marched through the deserts of Arabia. Their skin was scorched and burned 6 ways to Sunday. None too happy, I might add. And then left there. Now, when they were left there, then all of a sudden they realized the sin they committed against Earth, the sin that they committed against the family of man and the sun-kissed people of Earth. But by then, the Greys already sank their claws into them and said, look at what they did to you. They abandoned you. They left you for dead. But don't worry, because we're here to save you. And if you do everything we tell you, we will make you almighty and all-powerful, and we will give you dominion over the entire earth, and we will favor you and only you, with a few stipulations. From that day forward, every generation to come belongs to the Greys. Now you know where the alien abduction phenomena came from. It came from that original deal, that original pact between the outcast paleskin, the mutated abomination, and the Greys, who were conveniently right there and planned the whole thing from the start and promised them the world. So, of course, they made a deal with the devil at that point, and this is why, all of a sudden, Europe comes on the scene with this ungodly bloodlust to wipe out, take over, and colonize every other dark-skinned civilization on the planet, because that was also part of the deal. The deal was not only do future generations belong to the Greys, as far as the pale skin goes, but the other pact was, we'll give you all the ammunition you need, but we want you to go out and destroy the family of men. Colonize the living hell out of them. Now think about the term colonize. It's a French term, colonise. How is it defined? To segregate, divide, and conquer. That's what it means. And it doesn't matter whether it's the Botany Bay in Australia or the 13 slave colonies here in the United States. That's what it's meant for. To divide, conquer, and destroy. Think about all those Native American reservations, slave plantations, and concentration camps, whether they were Asian or Jewish during World War II. Okay? All coming from the original concept of colonization. Okay. That is what led to that. And this is what leads to this unbridled hatred towards the rest of the human race, to overpower and destroy. Now, the academics would love to tell you, oh, that's not it. It's, guns, germs, and steel. Wrong. Guns, germs, and steel were given to them on a silver platter. They didn't get it all by themselves. Okay? So, once again, you realize throughout history, academics, which usually pale skins writing the history books as usual, they look at a symptom, like the way some idiot doctor does in the medical industry, and treat it like a cause. If you learn history the right way, through the lens scope of extraterrestrial contact, then you start learning it correctly and it becomes dynamically much more interesting, exponentially. And of course, it always leads back to this type of situation. Now, the Greys, okay? As with every system, before I mentioned the two-party system, the original system between the Canis feudal lords and the reptilian queens. And there's always one in charge and one carrying out the dirty work. In other words, the executive branch and the legislative branch. Okay? So, the Greys are now in a position where they're reaching a point where they want to start receding into the background more and more. So they need to create a new two-party system to replace them, okay? Because they want to get back on track with that system again. Okay, fine. They create these two groups called the Rock of Pharaohs and the Rock of Shields. Linguistically, the Rock of Pharaohs become mispronounced as Rockefeller, and the Rock of Shields become mispronounced as Rothschild. So, here's your two-party system emanating right down the line. Reptilian and canine, okay? Rockefeller, Rothschild, Rockefeller, Rothschild, Republican and Democrat. Two-party system, right on down the line. And you cannot escape this, okay? As long as the pale skin exists, as long as the pale skin represents that elite 30% controlling the other 70%, okay, these things will not go away. All right, you will always have the transnational corporation. All right, you will always have the media conglomerates and corporate conglomerates. You will always have germ warfare, biological warfare, nuclear warfare. Show me one thing on this planet that the pale skin has offered back to Mother Earth or the family of man. And don't go offering up that academic PR bullshit about charity work and Red Cross work, okay? Because I can tell you right now, Red Cross is useless. Where was it during Hurricane Sandy? Nowhere. Okay? Who were the people actually going into those environments and helping people? It was the Occupy movement. And the Occupy movement is the one that everybody makes fun of. And yet they were the ones going into the neighborhood and helping everyone. Just like the Black Panthers did in the 60s. History repeats itself for those who don't learn from it. So, in keeping in line with that, the Greys invent the new two-party system, Rockefeller and Rothschilds, becoming the Rockefellers and the Rothschilds. And down through the line, you will see this type of replication in the corporate element over and over again, the two-party system. You have Opus Dei and Vatican City. You have the FDA and the pharmaceutical multinational. Okay? You have the corporate conglomerates and the media monopolies. Over and over and over again, there is always that two-party system replicating itself. Now we bring ourselves to the issue of, I would say, the issue with Galileo and Copernicus, just before we get into the founding fathers of the United States. The Egyptian university system was an amazing system that was set up for the sole purpose of preserving that ancient information from the atom, okay, from the original Iesu, preserving it for eons to come, even through the mysticism and the science and technology of sound and frequency, embedding it right into the walls in the Hall of Records, to the point where when the right people came along, they could actually release that information right from the wall, almost like playing a record player or a CD-ROM. Unfortunately, in retaliation against that, you have the white Freemasonry, which comes directly from the two-party system, directly from that original European abomination, for the sole purpose of destroying the human race. Okay? You have the fact that it wants to look legitimate in the eyes of the general public. Well, okay, so as time was on, they decided we need to create something that will legitimize us. Well, this is when the Vatican comes into existence, and therefore, by extension, this other abortion referred to as Christianity. Okay? It was for the sake of legitimizing the white Masonic elite by using this first official corporation to hit the face of the planet, okay, as some kind of legitimate funneling, okay, of all the illegal and illegitimate activities going on the planet. That was the first one. Now, guess who they used to build it? Of course, who was the first official pope? You get these two megalomaniacs who serve as the foundation of the Church, Vatican, and Christianity. One is this heinous misogynist, hated women, okay, hated Mary Magdalene to the core, okay, named Peter. And the other one is the megalomaniac who invented the whole crucifixion story, called Paul. And obviously his Jewish name Saul wasn't good enough for him, so this is when he renames himself Paul. These two, you have Peter, who invents the whore mythology, which never existed. Mary Magdalene was a rich and wealthy woman, and so was Jesus. Okay. Now, here's the other thing, too, that you're never taught about. Why was Mary and Joseph, his parents, pretty much all but erased from history? Well, the reason is because if you learned more about Joseph, that would open up a whole can of worms with the Egyptian university system and the Moorish legacy. Mary and Joseph are a heck of a lot more important than anything spoken about with that white, pale-skinned freak that's presented as Jesus. Okay? who wouldn't have lasted 3 seconds in the deserts of Arabia if he really was white. Mary and Joseph. Mary and her sister Elizabeth, daughters of Ruth, they come from that royal bloodline of Cleopatra and Nefertiti and Isis directly. That's their significance. Joseph, his major significance is that he was a minor prophet who knew all the inner circles of other teachers in the entire Arabian Peninsula, North Africa, and China. Knew them all. Do you ever hear about this? No. Why? Because that was all part of the Moorish legacy. He himself was a minor prophet. As such, he takes on the role and the mantle of being a teacher to his son, Isa, mispronounced as Jesus. And as such, word got out, as it always does, when there is a prodigy, a so-called Christ child, a teacher of the masses, a major Christ, and what was referred to at the time as the Archons, aka the Greys. They were going to go after him, and instead they use a form of psychological warfare against this child who doesn't know any better. And they start infusing him with images of death and crucifixion and all that. Can you imagine what it's like for a 5 or 6 year old to have to see those images plugged into their head? They don't understand it. Okay? So before the child was awakened too much the wrong way and therefore accidentally becoming his own antichrist, so to speak, Joseph took his son away. And this is where you get that so-called 30-year gap, all right, from the age of 13 to his late 20s, so to speak, that 15-year gap. And because nobody ever wants to talk about what happened there. Well, what happened was that Joseph took him all around to the Hindus and the High Lamas of Buddhism, and actually this is how Buddhism becomes the foundation of what's later referred to as Christianity. Okay? Anyone in Christianity who says other religions are false religions, just remember, it's those so-called false religions that gave birth to that ridiculous mythology that these tele-evangelists love screaming and yelling about when they're thumping on the Bible. Joseph took him specifically to Guru Master Ravanaji in India and stayed under his tutelage for 12 years. This is well documented. Guru Master Ravanaji is well known in India as a superior prince and a superior teacher. As such, as it was with Noble Drew Ali and Muhammad and the rest of them, when they reach a certain level of elevation and illumination, they get to pick their own name. So this child that belonged to Mary and Joseph that was brought to Guru Master Ravanaji, eventually he comes of age and decides to adopt the name Guru Master Prophet Isa. That was his full and proper name, Guru Master Prophet Isa. In his final initiation, you hear about this so-called 40 days and 40 nights sitting on the mountain doing God knows what. Okay? Oh, he was fasting. No, he wasn't. That mountain was not a mountain. That was a temple that was part of the Egyptian university system. It was a Jewish temple, but it was part of the Egyptian university system, and that's where he began his teachings. He reached a certain point where he was told, flat out in no uncertain terms, if you want to finish the process of initiation, illumination, and purification into the Egyptian university system, you have to go to Egypt, you have to go to the Hall of Records, you have to go to the Great Pyramid of Giza. And that's exactly what he did, and that's what all the major Christs do. So therein lies the background story of Mary and Joseph that no one ever wants to talk about, because Joseph played a key role in making sure that that child did not turn out to be an abomination that the Greys could control. Same thing applies with Muhammad, assassins trying to hunt him down. Same thing applies with Noble Drew Ali and the frustrations he had to deal with the black community here in the United States with all the bitterness and hatred to the point where he just threw his hands up in the air and said, "To hell with it, I'm going to evolve to the next plane." And of course you get the academic stories that Noble Drew Ali was beaten to death by the police. No prophet ever in the history of Earth would ever be touched like that. Ever. No prophet would ever be denigrated to the level of being beaten to death by what Malcolm X referred to as the white man's army, aka the police. Okay? That is forbidden. That is just simply understood by the benevolent factions and the malevolent ones to avoid all-out civil war in the skies. Leave the major prophets alone. Do not touch them. It is forbidden. So yes, are they threatened? Do they have threats against their life? Yes, they do. Why not? It's all part of psychological warfare. But can they actually be touched? No. It is forbidden. Otherwise, you end up having something where, like in science fiction where they talk about the prime directive, non-interference, if they actually cross that boundary and go after a major Christ, they have violated the prime directive, and that gives the benevolent factions carte blanche to move in and wipe the floor up with the malevolent factions. The malevolent factions have too much of a profiteering investment in wood and stone. They don't want a war. They just want sadistic control, because they don't see another living being as worth recognizing. They don't see the primates on this planet, the so-called Homo sapient man, as something worth recognizing as an equal. So that's what was happening with Mary and Joseph. Now Peter, okay, Peter's ego was used against him to build the Vatican for the Masonic agenda, aka the reptilian agenda. Okay, when it was done and built, when Vatican City was done, he was finally made aware of how he was manipulated, just like the way Marduk was. And as such, what does Peter do? He goes and crucifies himself upside down, head down, feet up. Why? Because that was his way of saying, the world has been turned upside down. What is truth is believed as fiction, and what is fiction is believed as truth. This is the reason why he crucified himself upside down, because the white Masonic elite had manipulated his ego, and he finally had to come to terms, being the coward that he was, and how hateful he was towards women, especially Mary Magdalene, how easy it was to manipulate him because of the way he was. That's your so-called rock of the church. Spineless coward who invented all this heinous propaganda. Now, at the time of the height of the Egyptian university system, okay, they came, there is also another piece of white propaganda and Masonic propaganda, the whole idea of raping and pillaging other people's history, is the idea that to this day, every academic tries to teach you that Greece is part of Europe. Wrong. Greece has always been part of Asia. No ifs, ands, or buts. It is not part of Europe. And there is no Middle East, as everyone would like to think. The Middle East does not exist. It is purely the fabrication of white man's psychology to separate Europe from what they refer to in racist terms as the yellow threat, that being, of course, Genghis Khan. At the time of Genghis Khan's reign of tyranny, he actually had the audacity to have such a powerful army to march right across Europe and get as far as Vienna and threaten the living hell out of white Europeans. And we're not just talking about a physical threat, we're talking about a forbidden psychological threat against the superior elitism that the pale skin was led to believe all along as the favored ones. The favored ones of the white Masonic elite, the favored ones of the reptilian elite. How could they be touched by this lowly yellow mongrel? How could he reach this far? Of course, someone sent him a letter saying he has an inheritance to go after, and that's what stopped the whole thing right there. Otherwise, Europe would have been enveloped into Asia, and there'd be none of this BS about a Middle East. The Middle East was invented via the same colonization tactics of the northern and southern hemispheres here and South Africa. It was invented for the sole purpose of creating a psychological barrier between Asia and Europe so that Europeans could get that false sense of superiority again, that nothing could touch them. Unfortunately, because of all that colonization in the Middle East and the fake international borders that were created because of those colonies, we have all this hatred and bitterness there now. In keeping with that as well, there is also the idea of, well, how did the whole thing with slavery begin? Okay, with going after Africa and North and South America and so forth. It's a three-pronged military campaign. There's the Muafa against Africa, there is the genocide against Native Americans in North and South America, and then there's the Chinese open door policy against Asia. Three-pronged military campaign invented for the sole purpose of overpowering and destroying the family of man. But it wasn't just done with the pale skins. Remember, there's the whole idea of the two-party system. And the pale skins, white Freemasonry, they didn't want to get their hands dirty. So what do? They invent this thing called Black Masonry. So they can start hiring on people to go out and do the dirty work, people of color and hue, to go out and enslave other people of color and hue. Case in point, Arabians. Okay. Some people have wondered where the word Islam comes from. Okay. In Egypt, the Egyptian university system is referred to as the Commission Mysteries, Kemet for short. The proper name of Egypt is Al-Kemet. Okay? The capital of Egypt is Cairo, but that's a watered down pronunciation. The original pronunciation is Al-Kahira. Al-Kahira translates into the word Mars, as in the planet Mars, the Elohim, the Sidonia Codex. Okay? So there's your direct Martian connection, all right, between the ancient peoples of Earth and the Sidonia Codex on Mars and the geoglyphs that exist there, sending us messages back to Earth here into Mesoamerica, Africa, and Asia. Okay. The thing is, though, when the philosophy of the Commission missionaries came to Arabia, the word Kemet ended up being changed to the word Islam. And this is how the two connect to each other there. And especially when you have a master teacher, a swift angel by the name of Gabriel, who is involved with both Joseph and also Muhammad, goes to Arabia, goes to Muhammad and begins teaching him everything there. And this is when the translation crosses over. Okay. The thing is, though, when the white slave traders came along, what they realized was that they couldn't just go in there by themselves. Okay, the African people would have taken one look at these weird-looking people with no color in their skin and strange hair on their face, and would have gone running. They weren't stupid. They knew something was wrong. So, to sucker punch the whole thing, they used Arabians, dark-skinned Arabians, who were capable of speaking in the same tongue as their African brothers and sisters, to go in to eastern part of Africa, and therein lies the beginning of the African Muafa, because they go in and they trick the African people, earn their trust, and sucker them into coming aboard the slave ships. To this day, Arabians know that history. And this also goes a long way to explaining why Arabians are so psychologically damaged, because they still haven't come to terms with the fact that they were used by their own white Masonic masters as middle management, as black Masons, to go in and sucker punch their own African brothers and sisters into becoming slaves in the Americas. Okay? The same thing happened here in the Americas, the genocide against Native Americans. certain Native Americans were adopted by the French, the Spanish, and the English to then go back and sucker punch their own people into making deals that no white person was ever going to carry through on. All for the sake of just getting them rounded up and sticking them on a reservation, or keeping them in one spot like Wounded Knee, so that they could all be rounded up and slaughtered in one spot. Men, women, and children left lying in a pool of their own blood. And then we go on and we add insult to injury by celebrating this abomination called Thanksgiving, which is doing little more than celebrating 500 years of genocide. Okay? Once again, another thing that the galactic community is left scratching their head wondering, why are you still celebrating this? Okay? It's purely a white holiday. So, now, at this point in time, I just wanted to ask you, what time are we at right now?
9:24.
9:24. You want to keep going, or do you want to stop?
We can keep going for a little while.
All right. Okay. I didn't know if you were waiting.
I got tea.
Okay.
I got tea.
Oh, you got to. Okay. Okay. So here's the other, getting back to where I started before with Greece. Greece has been mislabeled as being part of Europe, and part of that, once again, that psychology of the white mainstream of like, Greece mysteriously got all this information, just pulled it out of thin air, and this is how Europe begins its rise to civilization. This could not be farther from the truth. There is no mystery here as to where Greece got the information from. It's just that because the white Christian church did such a fantastic job of blacklisting the Egyptian university system, no one was allowed to know outside of Galileo or Copernicus where the real information came from. The fact of the matter is the Greeks were a bunch of imbeciles. They were barbaric, they were clubbing each other over the head, they were paranoid, and they were also going to war with the Persians all the time in Arabia. Okay, not only going to war with themselves, but also with Persia, which kept invading them. Now, if you take a back seat to this, step back a few spaces, imagine what this whole scenario looked like to ancient Egypt. The Egyptians, who were intentionally secretive because they knew that an imbecile like Greece would have used the information the wrong way, especially in the barbaric statehood they lived in. They looked at Greece and they were like, lost cause. They'll never get it. They'll never understand it. We can't teach them. They are not teachable. They are stupid. Let's let them evolve a little more. Well, thing is, the Greeks were so damn paranoid of everything that they looked upon the secretive nature of Egypt, okay, and became jealous of it. And they figured, they're hiding something from us. We want it. But they were too busy with Persia. They couldn't really spend the time focusing their efforts on going after Egypt. So Egypt just sat there and kept going about its business, teaching the world, passing on the information. On top of that, another horrendous misnomer is the idea that this ridiculous phrase of a Greek philosopher. There's no such thing as a Greek philosopher. Never have been, never will be. And case in point, the earlier, just for argument's sake, we'll call them Greek philosophers. The earlier Greek philosophers, okay, they were part of their own little nation states. The idea of Greece didn't come until later on in terms of nationalism. So you have these little nation states, okay, all vying for provincial recognition. Within those little tiny nation states, you had the original foundational philosophers who are permanently erased from history. You can still find them, but you got to work at it, okay? And why are they erased from history? Because they were the ones that sent all their students down to Egypt to learn. Why did they do that? Because they did the same thing themselves. They went and learned, they came back, tried to share the information, nobody wanted to listen. They sent all their students down to come back and then evolve from there in their own school of thought. This is where the idea of a school of thought came from, okay? Now, all of that ends up evolving into the very first well-known one, Socrates. Socrates left Greece, and was more so with Ionia, not really Greece, went down to Egypt, became a full-fledged Egyptian, no longer Greek, came back to Greece, and was crucified because of it, because they looked upon him as a traitor. Now, how in the hell do you refer to Greece as the foundation of civilization when it followed an adamant practice of victimizing, alienating, and even killing all of its philosophers? Because all those philosophers came from Egypt, okay? Socrates went through the whole scenario just like Jesus and Muhammad and everybody else did, and Noble Drew Ali and Abraham, all of them. He went through the initiation, the illumination. He even went as far as circumcising himself, just to be fully indoctrinated into the whole Egyptian university system and the whole Comitian mysteries. And when he was fully purified and illuminated, he tried to go back to Greece and teach them that, and right away the politicians got a hold of him and threw him in jail. And his own student, Plato, coward. It's interesting. Peter, Paul, Plato. All right, all these names seem similar, and they all equate to cowards. All right. Plato, who had his rich, spoiled friends, goes to his master, Socrates, sitting in his prison cell, waiting a death sentence, and says, "Look, we got more than enough money to pay off the guard. We can get you out of here. Let's just get the hell out of here. Wait till it dies down." Socrates at that point was of a much different illumination, much different frame of mind. And he said, if my own people will not even accept me as I am, then there's no point in going on. In which case he willingly drank the poison and killed himself because his own people had betrayed him. And it was proof as to the fact that the Egyptians, aka the Comitians, were correct in their assumptions and their viewpoints on the Greeks. The Greeks weren't the foundation of anything. The Greeks ripped off all of their information from the Egyptians. And it gets worse than that. As if that wasn't bad enough. Plato goes running like a coward. All right. Now, later on, there's this pale-skinned freak called Alexander who comes along, who really didn't contribute to anything other than running around all of Asia, Africa, and so forth like a spoiled brat trying to round up everybody. They referred to him as Alexander the Great. He was anything but. Okay? And his teacher was a jackbooted thug by the name of Aristotle. Now, Aristotle was a scientist. Now, the academics love to teach that Socrates taught Plato, partially true, and that Plato taught Aristotle, complete lie. There's no connection there. There is no way that a scientist would have been taught by a philosopher. That's not the way it was done. Those were two completely different schools of thought. Aristotle was Alexander, for argument's sake, Alexander the Great's teacher. To this day, there is not one historian that isn't left scratching their head wondering how the hell Aristotle wrote as many books and treatises as he did. How do you pull that off in one lifetime? It's impossible. And, okay, of course it's impossible because it never happened. Here's what did happen. When Alexander was leading his campaign all the way down to the Library of Alexandria in Egypt and invaded Egypt, and it was definitely an invasion, and then he goes and sabotages their belief system so that he can be assimilated and accepted. His teacher, Aristotle, asked him, can I go with you? So Alexander brings Aristotle to Egypt. Once Aristotle was there, he made a deal with his former student, Alexander, that once he invaded Egypt, he would want access to the Library of Alexandria for a period of time. Alexander agreed to it and said, you have this amount of time to get into that library, get what you want, and get out. So, what does that mean? That means that when you go back and look at the broken, half-written treatises that supposedly are attributed to Aristotle, you start putting the pieces together and realize this guy never wrote a complete book, ever. It was broken pieces here, there, and everywhere, and never a complete thought, never a complete philosophy. Why? Well, first of all, he was a scientist. He would not have understood the philosophies of the Comitian mysteries. But once he got into the library, you can imagine, under a strict amount of time, someone in a panic attack trying to write things down as fast as he could, get all the information he could, and then get out of there, brought it back to his students and said, here, rewrite this and make it look like I wrote it. And that, my dear friends, is the end of Aristotle. And this goes a long way to answering that so-called mystery as to how he gets away with being attributed with writing so much and yet at the same time so little. And if you take a look at his treatises, you realize it's dumbed down. It's not nearly as intelligent. It was as if it was being written in a panic by someone who only half understood what he was actually reading in the library. So, this is the so-called foundation of your Greek philosophy, okay? Even the term Hercules comes from the term Heracles, which is African, okay? All those Greek gods come from Egyptian gods, all right? And so then that brings us to, well, what about the most powerful god of all, Zeus? Okay, yeah, let's talk about Zeus. At the time that Enlil was in power, okay, there was a master commander who had become the favorite of the Anunnaki and the slaves, the Adapas. Everybody loved him. He was a master of all the martial arts. He was a master of all the military arts. The Air Force, the Army, the Navy, the Marines, okay? All that. And he became so popular that Enlil, being the nut job that he was, saw this guy as a threat. Thinking in his mind that the reason he was becoming so popular was that he was going to wage a coup against Enlil's reign. This popular guy that I'm referring to, okay, was known as Lord Zoo. All right. Now, Lord Zoo had really no intention of any kind of rebellion or takeover or coup, but the wheels had already been set in motion in Enlil's mind. He goes back to his father, and then with his father goes back to the reptilian queens and says, look, this guy is going to cause a headache for me. We got to do something about this. Well, sure enough, Enlil, being the master of the skies, had a piece of military weaponry that he was holding in reserve. And it is what George Lucas depicted in Star Wars as the Death Star. Okay, this is how these ideas percolate into the invisible college, aka books, movies, comic books, artwork, okay? The science fiction arena, the invisible college, all right? Little birdie comes in the window, whispers in George Lucas's ear, write this story, do it this way, here's the symbolism, do it. And that's how these great science fiction writers and storytellers come into existence with these movies. This is why the 1970s is seen as the great renaissance of the film industry, because it's actually depicting real history, even though we label it science fiction. So Enlil's got this planet killer, this Death Star, on reserve there, just in case. Well, word gets out that Enlil is plotting Lord Zoo's death. Lord Zoo, in defense, realizes this guy is nuts, there's no way to talk to him. He, as a master military strategist, goes and takes over the Death Star. Okay? And at the same time, right at that moment, here comes Enlil with the entire Canis and Reptilian armada to invade the solar system. Okay? Well, Lord Zoo goes up against them with the Death Star, and this battle ensues. Unfortunately, what he didn't realize is that Enlil had a few tricks up his sleeve with the reptilian queens and brings in a second Death Star. So now it's one Death Star versus the other. Lord Zoo loses control of his Death Star. He gets badly damaged. The two collide with each other in a calamity of events. This is what ends up smacking into the Earth, pretty much wrecking the whole joint and creating the asteroid belt and sending the Earth into a abnormal third orbit from the Sun. Okay, this totally destroys the scientific belief that the reason life evolved on this planet is because we have the perfect third orbit from the Sun. This, once again, is taking a symptom and treating it as a cause instead of looking at the real cause. Okay? No, we do not have the perfect third orbit. All right? If we had such a wonderful orbit, we wouldn't have this planet that has this, bastardized shape to it, like someone biting into an apple and then just leaving it there and letting the water fill in the gaps. That's not the normal shape to a planet. We look like, if you took all the water away, we look like the largest chunk of the asteroid belt, and the rest of that asteroid belt, rightfully, by feudal law, belongs to this planet. And that is why your corporations and your governments, come hell or high water, want that military base on the moon, because they want to use the moon as a jumping point to a military base on Mars, which they already have. Why? Because they want to use Mars as a jumping point to the asteroid belt to extract all those rich and valuable resources that actually are one and the same with all the rich and valuable resources here, and are not one and the same with any of the other planets. So, you figure that one out. All right. Now, Lord Zoo, who was so popular, once again going back to doubling syllables, became known as Lord Zuzu, and as such, Zuzu becomes mispronounced as Zeus. And this is how the mythology is created of the most powerful god of all. And when you think about it, it matches up perfectly. What is Zeus the god of? He's the god of lightning, the awakening of the beast, so to speak. And, of course, who was Lord Zoo? He was the master of the military, master general. Okay? If you were to take people like Genghis Khan and General Patton and General MacArthur and put them all together into one, you'd have Lord Zoo. And as such, this is where the whole symbology comes of, oh, he's up on Olympus, he has the power of lightning. Yeah, it's because he was a military strategist. That is, of course, the archetype that the Christians go and rip off from the Greeks and make it their own god. So what's funny is this. You have a military commander who becomes a pagan god and is then later on worshipped by the Christians. So the Christians are worshipping a military commander. Goes a long way to explaining all that bloodlust that Christianity has had towards people of color and hue throughout the ages. If you're worshipping a god of war, that's who you are then. Okay? There's no peace there. All right? Now, with the dismantling of this whole Greek paradigm, okay, the idea is that how did the Dark Ages come about? Well, once the Catholics, okay, you thought the Nazis were bad with the Schutzstaffel. Look at what the Catholics did to the Roman Empire. All right, they infiltrated empire, they use it as its own, and later on Catholic becomes mispronounced as Catholic, Roman Catholic. All right, and they take over the Roman Empire as their own, infiltrate it, just like any Masonic agenda, master infiltrators. All right, raping and pillaging other people's history. And once they get in there, they start putting their own people in power. Emperor Justinian, Emperor Theodosius, people I mentioned before. These two knuckleheads passed the decrees officially shutting down the Egyptian university system, and by doing so, ends up cutting off Europe, which was already in a pretty bad state to begin with, from having any access to true knowledge. The Egyptian university system is shut down and cut off. This is where your dark ages come from. This is what sends Europe down the toilet. Disease, pestilence, ignorance, stupidity. And who's the one who tries to come about and change all that during the Black Plague? Nostradamus, father of homeopathy. Okay, I don't give a damn about his quatrains. Every imbecile out there has their own interpretation. What's important is that he's the father of homeopathy. And during the time of the Black Plague, he used ancient knowledge through his own Masonic connections to get to the Moorish legacy, to get to the Comitian mysteries, and find out how to cure the Black Plague. And he had the right idea, but he was surrounded by imbeciles who wouldn't listen to them, so everybody just still kept dropping like flies. He's the one that taught them, cleanse the wound, take the scab off, don't just leave it on the body to spread, take a bath, clean yourself. But these idiots were totally against anything that represented whatever they perceived as pleasure, ecstasy, okay? They saw taking a bath as a sin. Why? Roman Empire, Roman baths, okay? The whole idea was you don't take a bath because you have to take your clothes off and you're not allowed to expose the body because that's too sensual, all right? And there is that European white pale skin oppression against sexuality, all right? To the point where even when it pilfered over here into the original colonies, these people, through the winter time, no baths at all, they would sew themselves up inside these this clothing, just this whole cocoon, and they wouldn't come out of it until springtime. Okay? Can you imagine the disease and the pestilence coming from that? Okay? Everybody romances about, oh, I wish I could go back in time. No, no. I like my clean toilet and my clean tub, okay, and my clean shower and my clean ass, okay? I like that. All right, going back in time, this is the part of history you never learn about. Even the academics agree with me on that one, okay? So say what you want about the high-tech age being a pain in the ass. It's better that than no shower, all right? Just take a look at what happened back in 2005 or 6 when we had that huge brownout and blackout in the northeast area here. And people in the Chicago area who rely on water power for their electricity couldn't take showers because everything runs on electricity, including the water. Okay, you should have seen what the newscasters looked like at that time. So keep in mind, you guys are moving in a forward motion here, even though we've run into a brick wall with stunted intelligence, stunted ignorance, stunted vocabulary. That's part of the agenda that you need to fight against, and you can't do that if you don't know it's being done to you. And this is where all of this is coming from. With the evolution of the Founding Fathers, you have another dynamic episode taking place there, especially with the showdown between George Washington, aka the Dirty Colonist, and General Cornwallis, aka the Master White Mason. All right? Think about it. When you want to start a new world, and this applies to Mars as well, there's no farmers and lawyers up there or doctors, okay? It's all miscreants and degenerates, okay? People taken from the prison system who mysteriously disappear from the prison cell and nobody knows what happens to them, all right? People taken from the prison system, people taken from the psychiatric ward, people taken from sanitariums, people lifted right off the damn street, okay? Bums and degenerates there. That, and the criminal mind, that is how you start a new world, okay? That was the humble beginnings of the 13 colonies here. When they tell you that people left Europe because of religious oppression, that could not be farther from the truth. First of all, the Pilgrims represented an iota of a fraction of a pinhead of what actually came over here. What came over here was every dirtbag, rapist, and scumbag under the sun that Europe didn't want. Another reason why Native Americans don't exactly hold white people in high regard, okay? They took all of their garbage, said, yes, go, create a new world, and whatever profit comes from it, bring it back to us, okay? If you die, well, that's your problem. Because the way you create a new world is you take people who have nothing to lose and who are willing to kill each other off in the process, and eventually what happens is that one all-powerful one comes to the forehead and starts creating the rules. And let's not forget the female element. Who civilizes the one who survives? There's always going to be a woman that comes along, and this conqueror will realize his own mortality and will realize that he has to have children if he wants to live forever. It is always a woman who serves as the foundation of each and every civilization after the male has killed off all the competition. That is how a new society is created. And it's always the way it's going to be. If you try to take lawyers and doctors and firemen and policemen and so forth and take them off this planet and dump them on Mars, within a couple of years you would have a rebellion on your hands. They'd all want to come right back to Earth. Why? Because they are psychologically invested in where they live, where they're established, their community, the people. You can't take people from middle class and stick them in an alien environment, okay? And that was the whole thinking involved for creating the Adapa as well as a slave class here on this planet. Believe me, they tried taking other alien species as slaves from other solar systems, other kingdoms, and bringing them to this planet for slave labor. It didn't work. Of course, this goes a long way to explaining all these strange anomalies in archaeology that you see in the strata of the earth, these strange creatures that don't fit into the fossil record. Those are the ones that they attempted to import slave labor on. Didn't work. Psychological meltdown. Okay? You have to create something from the environment or use the lowest common denominator that has nothing to lose. If Mars is ever going to be properly colonized, first of all, it'll probably look like something like Albuquerque, New Mexico, where I live. That's a spitting image of what the Sidonia Plateau will look like in 200 years. And they'll take every low-class degenerate that nobody gives a damn about, and they will dump them on Mars under military rule, just like Botany Bay, and let them fend for themselves, kill each other off, and who's ever the supreme ruler at the end of it, they're the ones that establish the new government. The movie Total Recall with Arnold Schwarzenegger made that very clear. Here we have to pay for our water. On Mars you will have to pay for the air that you breathe. And it will be a corporation that controls it. Okay? This is the reason why the benevolent factions do not want the human race leaving this planet. And you always get these scientists in the scientific community like, the only way the human race is going to survive is by expanding and getting out there and colonizing other planets. Well, that's what Hitler said, and look what happened there. Okay? That brings in another issue. The idea of upper management versus middle management and how it plays out in the real world.
Right off the Barnary sub-stop, Philadelphia, PA. Shot so loud you would think it was a club spot. African Americans, although we all over the web, we the hood librarians. We ship to prisons too. We reach out and deliver to those that spitting too, but it's more than a bookstore. You want it, we got it. Mixtapes, DVDs, and culture products. BlackandNobel got our hands in a lot of prizes. We welcome on to come build the energy. It's positive. And remember, other teams is awakened conscious. Come through and experience this place of knowledge. They say they'll put it in a book if they wanna hide it from us, but we got the book so you can buy it from us. Something to read while you're on a train or riding a bus. Get your read on, food for thought, get your eat on. BlackandNobel, my book said BlackandNobel. BlackandNobel, my book said BlackandNobel.